Hi anatomy students, this is Dr. Allis. In this short video, we're going to talk about the ways that the cells of the epidermis attach to each other, and we're also going to explore the ways that they make you waterproof. Let's start with reminding ourselves that the cells that live in the outermost layer of the skin, the epidermis, are called keratinocytes. Keratinocytes are a type of cells that are full of that keratin protein that we talked about in the previous video. Remember that keratin proteins have non-polar covalent bonds inside of them, making them a very tough protein. So we fill the cells on the outermost layer of your skin with this very tough keratin protein, and that makes your skin tough on the outside. It's resistant to damage. The other thing that strong keratin protein does for the cells of our epidermis is it helps us to form a kind of junction called desmosomes. When we look at a picture of cells, you can see desmosomes inside this little box right here. Let's zoom in close and look at one. A desmosome is a type of anchor between two cells that are next to each other. These anchors are attached to the keratin proteins that are found inside each of these cells. This kind of junction looks a lot like the ceiling if you go to Walmart or Costco or Sam's Club, where there's those metal bars that are hanging down to help support the ceiling. That's the way this kind of junction works. I've got these tough keratin proteins that are helping me no matter what direction I get pulled. So we anchor together our keratinocytes using these junctions called desmosomes. Then, if a cell gets pulled this direction, or it gets pulled this direction, or over this way, there's always keratin proteins in the neighboring cell that are making sure we're still tightly attached. So when we talk about keratin proteins, the two things to remember is that this is the kind of protein that makes your cells in the epidermis of your skin very tough or hard for you to damage. And the other thing for us to remember about them is they help us to form the kind of junction called desmosomes that are a tight junction to keep cells attached to each other. There is one other kind of way or kind of junction that cells use to hold themselves together, and this is what we call a tight junction. Tight junctions are very helpful when we're talking about waterproofing, or when we're talking about keeping fluids out from the outside of your body or in from the inside of the body. When we talk about tight junctions, we're no longer using those keratin proteins to build them. We're using a completely different set of proteins, and this set of proteins actually squeezes together the plasma membranes of neighboring cells, so there's literally no space for water to go in or out. So tight junctions keep the fluids that are on the outside or the inside from going between the cells, helping you to conserve water and helping you, when you take a bath, to not absorb all of the water. Again, this is an important idea for you to write down for yourself. Please remember that tight junctions are not made with keratin proteins. Desmosomes are, but tight junctions are not. In addition to using tight junctions to waterproof our cells, keratinocytes in the epidermis also use a structure called glycolipids. Glycolipids are sometimes called lamellar granules. And I mention this extra name, lamellar granules, because in a moment that's going to help us understand where in the skin I find these structures, these glycolipids. Let's talk about the chemistry of a glycolipid. Its name tells me that it has two distinct parts. It has the glyco part and the lipid part. The lipid part is what really determines the biochemical properties or the characteristics of this molecule. Because it is part lipid, we would consider a glycolipid non-polar. Just like those lipid tails in the membrane, glycolipids don't like water. And the fancy anatomy word for I don't like water is hydrophobic. These glycolipids, or these lamellar granules, are most noticeable here in stratum granulosum. In fact, that's why it's got its name, granulosum, because of these little granules, or these little spots, in this layer here in the epidermis. Lamellar granules, or glycolipids, are only made by cells once they grow into this layer here, stratum granulosum. So from stratum granulosum up through stratum corneum, we have a lot of glycolipids present. I kind of like to think about building glycolipids as a midlife crisis hobby. So keratinocytes start their life cycle down here in stratum basal. In stratum basal, we're right next to the dermis. And the dermis is where all of my nutrients and oxygen comes from. When I'm down here in stratum basal, I'm living the life, I'm growing, I end up in stratum spinosum, where I keep growing. But by the time I hit stratum granulosum, I realize that I'm over halfway to stratum corneum. I'm basically on my way to the outside of the body. And the outside of the body is pretty scary and pretty rough. I need to protect myself. So in stratum granulosum, the cells that live in this layer make lamellar granules. They spit out these lamellar granules that makes them waterproof. So any water that tries to get through stratum corneum or tries to get through stratum granulosum is stuck. It's not going to be able to get past them. Stratum granulosum, where I make these glycolipids, is the layer where my keratinocytes, or my skin cells, start to die. Everything above stratum granulosum, so stratum corneum in thin skin, or stratum lucidum as well in thick skin, those cells are completely dead. This is because of those glycolipids that we just talked about. The glycolipids keep water that's outside of the cell from getting into your body. But at the same time, glycolipids also stop water from moving from inside the body to the outside. Water is where I find things like oxygen or glucose dissolved in. If I block the oxygen and the glucose that was coming from the dermis and working its way up to my cells that are up higher, by putting this glycolipid covering on these cells, I'm preventing them from being able to receive the oxygen and the nutrients that they need to survive. Glycolipids stop water from getting inside the body, absolutely. But they also stop the nutrients from getting to the cells that are found on the other side of them. Glycolipids play a role in the death of stratum granulosum and stratum corneum and stratum lucidum, because these are the molecules that literally lead those cells to starve to death.